President-elect Joe Biden says he'll begin nominating people to fill his cabinet before Thanksgiving. Mr. Biden is trying to move ahead with parts of a typical White House transition, despite facing ongoing delays in the formal launch of the process. He's waiting on Trump appointee Emily Murphy, head of the General Services Administration, to recognize his victory. Until then, the Biden team is blocked from accessing government resources like office space and nearly $10 million in transition funds. For more, let's bring in Megan Cassella. She's a co-author of Politico's Transition Playbook. Great to have you with us. Thank you, Megan, for being with us. First of all, for people who aren't familiar with this, because a lot of this is behind the scenes, explain to us how the process of filling cabinet positions will play out. Which are the top priorities, and if President Trump's refusal to concede impacts that at all?
It does a bit, but many parts of it can move forward. So the presidential transition always moves at a breakneck speed. There's only about 70 days between Election Day and Inauguration Day. What this delay does for the Biden team is it means that they don't have the ability to work with the Office of Government Ethics. They don't have the ability to work with the State Department to set up calls with foreign leaders. As you mentioned, they don't have the ability to access that transition funding, but they can move forward with other areas in terms of vetting, and they can start choosing their cabinet. So that's what's happening now. It's been happening for months already. There's a transition team that has been working quietly behind the scenes up until Election Day to get settled. They're looking now at choosing likely White House staff. We're expecting to get an announcement probably within the next week of a chief of staff, for example, a press secretary, maybe a communications director as well. We also expect to hear pretty early on the president's economic team as well as his health team, because we know that they want to get an early start on both the COVID response and stimulus talks and trying to get the economy back, where they want it to be as well. So we expect to get those in the next few weeks, but it's a very quick process. They know they only have a few months to get this set up. And so every day that there is this delay, it does slow them up a bit.
Well, in a broad sense, what are the competing interests that Mr. Biden will be trying to appeal to when he makes these appointments?
All sorts of competing interests. So just within the Democratic Party alone, he's going to be needing to appeal to both moderate Democrats and more progressive who want to see him go and take on big banks, for example, rather than choose people for his economic team that have corporate ties. That's just one example. He's also looking at the makeup of Congress next year. His cabinet appointees will need to get through the Senate for approval. Democrats will have at most 50 seats in the Senate, but that's meaning that they must win both runoffs in Georgia as well. So they're looking at the very likely possibility of a Republican-controlled Senate, which means that Biden may have to choose contenders who Mitch McConnell approves of, which of course progressives may not approve of. So he's going to have to strike that balance there. He also has Silicon Valley types and Wall Street types who donated to his campaign and want to make their voices heard as well. So it's this huge coalition. And, it seems impossible that any one nomination could appeal to all parties, but he's going to have to try to strike that balance as he goes to make up his cabinet.
Yeah, impossible really seems to be the operative word there. Well, Politico has compiled a lengthy list of potential candidates. Who are some of the top contenders?
We've got a lot in there. Looking at Treasury, I guess we could start. The president-elect really wants to make history with this pick by choosing a woman or a person of color. So Lael Brainerd has been an early favorite for that. She's a Federal Reserve governor whose name has been out there. Raphael Bostic is someone he's a Black man who we hear Senator Sherrod Brown is a fan of, and so he may get the nod as well. Someone like Roger Ferguson is the head of TIAA-CREF, and he's on that list as well. Those are three that we may see there. We know that Elizabeth Warren, the Massachusetts senator, is also interested in that role. She's someone who may have trouble getting through a Republican-led Senate for confirmation, but she's on that list as well. Looking at a department like Health and Human Services, which of course will be pivotal given the coronavirus pandemic. Michelle Lujan Grisham appears to be a favorite for that of New Mexico. She's a former governor of New Mexico, or current governor, and she's been helping with the transition team as well and looks to be a favorite there. Other roles too, the Defense Department, Michelle Flournoy is an early favorite there. And she would also, I believe, make history there as the first woman to lead that department. And so, as you mentioned, there are dozens of names out there, but we're starting to get a sense of what the president-elect wants to be the most diverse cabinet ever.
Yeah, and, you know, the reason we go through this, some folks say this is just another Washington parlor game, but it does suggest a direction in policy and priorities for this Biden administration, which is why we're talking about it. But you touched on this a moment ago. So are folks impeded at all by the fact that they cannot still access federal departments and agencies because there has not been a formal launch of this transition?
That's the biggest holdup, certainly. I would say in terms of the transition process and what can't move forward the longer that the GSA does not make this affirmation of Biden's victory. And so what that means is that there are hundreds of Biden officials who are ready to go into agencies. Office space has very likely been set aside for them in these agencies. The current officials there, both career and political staffers, have spent months compiling briefing books of information. And what those books are is they're a way of getting the new government up to speed on everything going on within that department. So it's, you know, what needs to be done right away, what will need early attention, what will the new secretary need to know, where might there be early problems or areas that need a decision to be made, and that sort of thing. And so, you know, on one hand, the Biden team says we've only been out of power for 4 years. It's a very experienced team. They likely know what they're getting into, at least many people who are working on his transition may have worked in the Obama administration and have that experience. But the longer that they can't get into those agencies, it does delay their ability to sort of start forming their responses and hit the ground running.
All right, Megan Cassella for us. Megan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.